The first time Arya Valen saw him, she thought he was just another wandering soldier for hire, one more drifter drawn to the border wars like scavengers to smoke. He came to the outpost on Daran Prime on a dusty evening, the kind of sunset that painted the deserts red and gold, when the wind carried the faint scent of ozone and blood. The frontier had been burning for years by then, but no one expected it to last. Empires always had a way of swallowing rebellion whole, and the Valen rebellion was no exception. Arya had grown up under the banners of the Empire, but she had turned against it when it burned her city to glass. Now she was a captain in the resistance, hardened, hollow, and tired of the faces of dead men who thought dying for freedom meant something. So when this stranger walked through the gate, tall, quiet, wearing battered armor without insignia, she didn't see salvation. She saw trouble. He gave no name at first, only a call sign. Varen. His armor was matte black, patched with old repair welds, his rifle older than most of her soldiers, but he carried himself like a veteran, one who had seen more wars than anyone should and still came out breathing. He asked no questions, offered no allegiance, just said, "You're paying for fighters, right?" Arya studied him from across the table in the command tent, arms folded, her amber eyes cold. "We're not pirates. We don't hire killers. We fight for something." Varen tilted his head slightly, eyes the color of frost under the shadow of his hood. "Everyone fights for something. Some just admit it's a paycheck." His tone wasn't mocking, just matter of fact, and for some reason that irritated her more. But they were desperate. The Empire had tightened its grip around the western reaches, cutting off supply lines, choking the rebellion slowly. Arya had lost 2 platoons in the last skirmish. They needed every gun they could get. So she hired him. For 1 week, no more. "We pay in rations, not credits," she said curtly. "You take orders from me. You break rank, I put you down myself." He didn't flinch. "Understood, Captain." That was the first time she heard him call her by rank, and though she tried to ignore it, something in the way he said it, respectful, steady, lodged itself in her mind. The first battle they fought together was a disaster. The Empire's drones swept down from orbit, surgical and relentless, turning the desert canyons into firestorms. Arya's forces were pinned, her command unit buried under rock after an airstrike vaporized half the ridge. When she crawled free, bleeding and half-deaf from the blast, she found Varen there, dragging wounded soldiers out from the wreckage, his armor scorched, his movements calm and efficient. He barked orders with the authority of someone who had led men before, and somehow, impossibly, he rallied them. When the next wave came, he stood in front, rifle braced against his shoulder, firing with precision that seemed almost inhuman. The enemy advance faltered. Then, when the ammunition ran dry, he went forward alone, into the smoke and fire. Arya never saw anyone move like that. He wasn't reckless. He was deliberate. Every motion, every strike had purpose. When the last Imperial drone fell, his armor was smoking, his breath ragged, but he was still standing. When he turned to face her, she realized her men were staring, not at her, but at him, and she hated the feeling that twisted in her chest then. Gratitude, maybe even awe. That night, under a broken sky filled with the glow of orbital fire, she found him sitting apart from the others, cleaning his weapon. The camp was quiet, soldiers sleeping where they fell, the air thick with dust and exhaustion. Arya sat across from him, wordless for a long time. Finally she asked, "Where did you learn to fight like that?" He didn't look up. "Different wars," he said softly. "Different worlds." She frowned. "You're not from Duran." He shook his head. "No one is from anywhere, not really. Not anymore." His voice carried a weight she couldn't place, like a man who had seen too much and expected to see more. "You're not a mercenary," she said. It wasn't a question, but he smiled faintly. "That's what you hired me as. Maybe that's enough." In the days that followed, he stayed close to her unit, never speaking unless spoken to, never resting more than an hour. He trained her soldiers with brutal efficiency, teaching them techniques they'd never seen before. Close-quarters combat meant for zero gravity, anti-drone tactics using improvised decoys, and strange maneuvers that hinted at deep familiarity with Imperial doctrine. When Arya confronted him about it, he finally told her the truth, or a part of it. "I fought for them once," he said. "The Empire. Long time ago." The admission hit her like a blow. "You're a defector?" she demanded. He shrugged. "Call it that. They called it treason." Her instinct was to order him out, to send him away before her people found out. But something in his eyes stopped her, something hollow and guilt-ridden, the look of a man who'd already been punished enough. "Why help us?" she asked. He hesitated, then said simply, "Because I know what they're capable of, and no one should live under that." The next offensive proved worse than the last. Imperial ground troops, real soldiers, not drones, descended on the settlement at Koresh Basin. The rebels were outnumbered 5-1. The Empire's war machines rolled through the dust like gods of steel, and the resistance line began to collapse. Arya's command fell back to the old mining tunnels, desperate to hold the entrance. She radioed for retreat, but the signal jammed. That was when Varen appeared again, covered in soot, carrying a wounded child he'd pulled from the ruins. "You can't win a stand-up fight," he told her. "We make them bleed instead." And before she could stop him, he walked into the open, rigging explosives along the ridge with steady, practiced motions. The detonations ripped through the canyons, burying Imperial armor under tons of rock. But it wasn't enough. When the dust cleared, the soldiers still came. Varen held the line while the survivors escaped through the tunnels, his rifle spitting blue arcs of plasma until the barrel glowed white. Arya refused to leave him. She ran back into the chaos, ignoring the protests of her men, found him kneeling behind a shattered barricade, blood soaking through the cracks in his armor. "You should have left," he rasped. "Not my style," she said, pulling him up by the arm. Together they staggered into the tunnels as the canyon collapsed behind them. They emerged miles away at dawn, half dead but alive. The others cheered weakly when they saw Varen limping beside her, smoke rising from his armor. For the first time Arya saw him smile. Not the faint ghost of one, but something real. It changed him. It changed her too. The soldiers whispered his name now, calling him the Black Ghost, the mercenary who defied the Empire's machines. And though she told herself it didn't matter, she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, wondering what kind of man would fight like a weapon but refuse to be one. Weeks passed. The rebellion gained ground. Word spread that a mysterious warrior had joined the cause, turning defeat into survival wherever he went. The Empire took notice. Bounties appeared on every transmission channel. Varen, priority kill target. Arya confronted him about it one night. "They know who you are," she said. "They fear you." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "No, they remember me." And before she could ask what he meant, an alarm shattered the night. Imperial strike craft were descending. The outpost had been found. As the soldiers scrambled to positions, Arya saw Varen walking toward the perimeter, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his movements deliberate, unhurried. "You can't take them alone," she called after him. He turned just enough for her to see his eyes in the firelight, calm, resigned, and yet burning with something fierce. "You think I'm a mercenary," he said softly, "but I've stood against worse than empires." Then he stepped into the darkness, where the thunder of engines grew louder by the second. Arya watched him go, and for the first time in years, she felt fear, not for herself, but for the man who might be more than he seemed. She didn't know it then, but that night would change the course of the rebellion and the fate of the Empire itself. Because the mercenary she had hired for rations and distrust was about to remind the galaxy what it meant to stand alone against power. And the name Varen would soon be spoken not as a curse, but as a legend. The strike came like a hammer out of the night sky, and for a moment the world itself seemed to shatter. The Imperial ships didn't announce themselves with sirens or warnings. They came with silence, black silhouettes against the stars, cutting through the atmosphere with the precision of a blade. Arya's command outpost erupted into chaos. Soldiers shouted over crackling comms, weapons charged, and the sky lit up with the sickly blue of descending plasma fire. She raced through the smoke-choked corridors of the base, barking orders into her wristband, trying to pull her forces together. Somewhere above, the engines screamed, and the earth itself trembled beneath the fury of the Empire. Her every instinct told her this was it. The Empire had found them at last, and no amount of courage or desperation would save them this time. And yet through the storm, one figure moved with absolute calm. Varen stood on the outer wall, his armor already blackened by dust and fire, staring up at the burning sky as if it were an old memory. When the first wave hit, he didn't retreat. He didn't shout. He simply lifted his rifle and began to fire. His shots weren't random bursts like the others. Each one landed, each one mattered. Every drone that fell did so because he wanted it to. Arya saw him through the smoke, his silhouette haloed by fire, and for a second, the world seemed to slow. Her soldiers rallied around him instinctively, following his lead as if he were born for this chaos. Maybe he was, because while the Empire attacked like a machine, Varen fought like a force of nature. When the first ground carriers broke through the perimeter, she thought it was over. The machines were unstoppable, armored giants bristling with weapons, walking fortresses of steel. But Varen didn't retreat. He leaped onto one of the carriers as it tore through the walls, planted something beneath its central plating, and dove off just before the explosion gutted it from within. The shockwave knocked Arya to the ground. When she looked up, he was gone, swallowed by smoke and fire. Her heart clenched, but she had no time to look for him. The Empire was pouring in. She fought like a cornered animal, blaster in hand, shouting for her men to fall back to the secondary line. The night was filled with screams and static. Through the chaos, she thought she saw movement, a shadow cutting through the firestorm, too fluid, too deliberate to be one of theirs. Then the comms came alive with a voice she hadn't realized she'd been waiting for. "Captain," Varen said, calm as ever. "North Ridge. Evacuate through the tunnels. I'll hold them." "Are you insane?" she snapped. "You can't hold that line alone." "I won't have to," he replied. "They'll come to me." And the line went dead. Arya hesitated for only a heartbeat before she did what she never thought she'd do. She trusted him. She ordered her forces to retreat through the mining tunnels, dragging the wounded, carrying what weapons they could. Behind them, the desert shook with detonations. Through the comm feed, she could still hear the fight. Varen's voice giving short, precise commands, the sound of rifle fire, the scream of engines, then silence. By the time they emerged on the far side of the canyon, dawn was breaking. The sky was gray with smoke, the sun just a pale ghost behind it. Arya looked back toward the ruins of the outpost, expecting to see nothing but wreckage. Instead, she saw him. Varen walked out of the fire like a specter, his armor cracked and burned, the black visor of his helmet reflecting the light of the rising sun. Around him, the ground was littered with shattered machines. The Empire had retreated. One man had broken their assault. When he reached her, he collapsed to one knee, his breath rasping through the speaker of his helmet. Arya rushed forward, catching him before he fell. "You should be dead," she whispered. His voice was barely audible. "Maybe later." He smiled faintly beneath the visor, then lost consciousness. They carried him with them as they fled into the mountains, far from the Empire's sensors. For 3 days he didn't wake. Arya stayed by his side, patching what wounds she could. Beneath the armor she saw the scars, old ones crisscrossing his body like a map of violence. He'd been shot, burned, cut, and somehow lived through all of it. But what struck her most wasn't the damage. It was the marks that weren't from battle at all. Implant scars, surgical grafts, traces of neural augments that weren't resistance-made. He'd been altered by the Empire. When he finally stirred, she confronted him. "What are you?" she demanded, her tone sharp but her eyes uncertain. "You're not just a soldier. You're one of them." He didn't deny it. He sat up slowly, grimacing from pain, and removed his helmet. His face was lean, weathered, and human, too human, but his eyes were something else. The faint glow in the irises wasn't natural. "I was," he said simply. "They built me to fight their wars. I fought them all, until I realized what we were really doing." Arya stared, stunned. "You're a revenant!" The word came out like a curse. The revenants were myth. Imperial super soldiers, half machine, designed to crush uprisings without hesitation. "They wiped them out after the Eastern Purge," she said. "You're supposed to be extinct." "Not extinct," he murmured. "Just inconvenient. I refused an order. They called it treason, and they buried me alive for it." She was silent for a long time. "Why help us then?" He met her gaze. "Because I remember what it's like to believe in something, and because they'll never stop. Not unless someone stands in their way." In the days that followed, Varen became more than a mercenary. He was a symbol. Soldiers who had lost faith began to fight again, inspired by his presence. When he walked among them, they straightened their backs, as if his courage was something they could borrow. Arya tried to ignore the way she felt when she saw him, how his voice seemed to quiet the noise in her mind, how his eyes, those strange cold eyes, softened when they met hers. She told herself it was respect, nothing more. But when she caught herself watching him through the campfire's glow, she knew that wasn't true. News of the Black Ghost spread across the frontier. Each rumor made him larger than life. That he'd survived plasma strikes, that he could move faster than light, that he'd once killed an Imperial general with his bare hands. Arya knew most of it was nonsense, but the effect was real. The rebellion was no longer dying. It was growing, and with growth came danger. The Empire was taking notice. One night, weeks after the outpost's fall, a transmission reached them from an old frequency Arya thought had been abandoned. It was Imperial code, ancient and encrypted. Varen listened in silence, his jaw tightening. When it ended, he stood up and began gathering his gear. "They know where we are," he said. "They're coming again." "How?" Arya demanded. "We've stayed off the network." "They don't need signals," he said. "They know me. They built me. I'm their beacon." Her blood ran cold. "You're saying they're tracking you?" "Yes." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "Which means I can't stay." "You're not leaving," she said sharply. "We need you. The men, they need hope," he interrupted. "Not me. And if I stay, they'll die for it." She stepped closer, her hand tightening on his arm. "Don't do this. You can't fight them alone." His voice softened. "It's the only thing I've ever done alone." Before she could stop him, he was gone, vanishing into the dunes under the pale light of twin moons, leaving nothing but footprints that the wind quickly erased. Arya watched until he disappeared over the horizon. She felt something twist in her chest, an ache she hadn't known she was capable of. He wasn't just another soldier anymore. He was the first man she'd met since the war began, who made her believe they might actually win. 2 days later, reports came in. Imperial convoys destroyed, communication relays sabotaged, entire platoons wiped out by a single combatant. The rebels whispered his name again. The Empire called him the Defector Revenant. But to Arya, he was just Varen, the man she'd called a mercenary and now couldn't stop thinking about. Then came the message. It arrived encoded through a secure relay, untraceable. Her text decrypted it and handed her the datapad. The message contained only 5 words. "They're coming for me tonight." Arya didn't hesitate. She gathered her best squad and went after him. The coordinates led to an old industrial city, abandoned ruins from before the rebellion. When they arrived, they found it surrounded by Imperial ships. She ordered her team to hold position, then slipped in alone. The air inside was heavy with smoke and ash. She followed the sound of gunfire until she reached the central square. Varen was there, fighting like a cornered wolf, his armor shattered, his movements still impossibly fast. Dozens of soldiers surrounded him. She joined the fight without thinking, her rifle blazing, covering his flank. Together they tore through the enemy, moving as if they'd trained side by side their entire lives. When the last soldier fell, Varen dropped to his knees, his armor flickering with damaged circuits. She ran to him, pulling off his helmet. His face was pale, streaked with blood. "You shouldn't have come," he murmured. "Neither should you," she whispered back, gripping his hand. "But here we are." Outside, the sound of engines roared again. More were coming. He looked at her, eyes soft but filled with something fierce. "Then we make them remember," he said, and as the shadows of Imperial dropships darkened the ruins, Arya realized with a chill that this wasn't just another battle. This was the moment the Empire would learn that the ghost they had created had come back to haunt them. The city burned around them. Flames licked at the edges of shattered towers, the air thick with smoke and the bitter tang of plasma discharge. The roar of engines thundered overhead as the Empire descended like a storm, filling the sky with dropships and gunships that blotted out the stars. Arya and Varen stood amid the ruins, shoulder to shoulder, their bodies outlined by the glow of firelight. Around them lay the wreckage of the first wave, Imperial drones reduced to twisted metal, soldiers scattered across the street like broken puppets. The air shimmered with heat, and for a moment there was silence, that strange, fragile stillness that comes only before another wave of violence. Varen checked the charge on his rifle, his movements mechanical but controlled. Arya's pulse hammered in her ears. She had followed him here against every order, and now she wondered if she had doomed them both. "They're surrounding us," she said, scanning the rooftops. Varen's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Good. Makes it easier." When the next wave hit, it came fast. Troopers in powered armor dropping from the sky like meteors, rifles blazing. Arya dove for cover behind a collapsed wall, firing in short bursts. Varen didn't move. He strode forward into the gunfire, his shield generator flaring to life in a blaze of golden light, bullets and plasma bolts deflecting harmlessly around him. He moved with a terrible grace, cutting through soldiers as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times before. Every motion was deliberate, efficient, brutal. Arya covered him as best she could, but it was clear he didn't need her protection. It was as though the Empire's training, the augments, the pain, everything they'd done to him, had been reborn as vengeance. And for a heartbeat watching him fight, Arya forgot to breathe. She didn't see the rocket until it was too late. It struck the building beside her, throwing her to the ground. The impact ripped through her side, leaving her gasping in pain. Her visor cracked, the world spinning. Through the haze, she saw Varen charge toward her, cutting down the soldier who had fired the shot. He lifted her effortlessly, his hand warm against her armor, and carried her into the shadow of a ruined archway. "You're hit," he said. She tried to answer but couldn't. He tore open a med pack, sealing the wound with practiced precision. His voice was distant, steady, the tone of a man who'd done this too many times before. "You'll live. Stay behind me." She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't some recruit to be protected, but her voice wouldn't come. He stood and stepped back into the firestorm. The Empire's forces poured in from every direction, and yet somehow he held them. He moved like something out of legend. Not a man but a weapon, forged in pain, wielded by his own will. Arya watched, half-conscious, as his armor dimmed and sparked, as blood streaked his jaw, as his every strike seemed to defy inevitability itself. She realized then what he truly was. Not just a revenant, not just a defector, he was everything the Empire feared most. Proof that their creation could turn against them, and still be human enough to care. When she woke again, the city was silent. The fires still burned, but there were no more soldiers, no more gunships. The sun had begun to rise, turning the smoke into rivers of gold. Varen sat beside her, slumped against a wall, his helmet off, blood streaking his temple. His rifle lay across his knees. "You're awake," he said quietly. She looked around, dazed. "How long?" "6 hours," he said. They pulled back. She pushed herself up, wincing at the pain. "Why?" He gave a small, bitter smile. "Because I let them think we're dead." She studied him then, really studied him. The man beneath the myth. His face was drawn, pale, but his eyes still burned with that strange light, half machine and half soul. "You should have left me," she said softly. "You could have escaped." He shook his head. "Not without you." Her chest tightened, though she said nothing. Instead, she stood and scanned the horizon. The city was gone, nothing but ash and ghosts. "We can't stay here," she said. "They'll come back." He nodded. "Then we move." They traveled north through the wastelands, avoiding patrols and drone sweeps. Every step felt heavier, every mile colder. The desert stretched endless around them, an ocean of sand and stone beneath a sky too vast to feel safe beneath. Varen barely spoke, But when he did, his words were precise, calculated, a soldier's mind always moving. Arya found herself watching him more than she should have, wondering what lay beneath the silence. Sometimes, at night, when they stopped to rest, she would catch him staring up at the stars. "What are you thinking?" she asked once. He didn't look at her. "That I used to fight for them," he said quietly. "Every world we burned, every life we erased, it was all in the name of order. I believed in it. I believed the Empire made us stronger." He paused. "Then I saw what strength cost." Arya listened, her heart heavy. "You can't change the past," she said. He turned his gaze toward her then, his expression unreadable. "No," he said, "but I can make sure it means something." Days later, they found refuge in an old resistance outpost buried beneath the dunes. It was half-collapsed, filled with dust and memories, but it would serve. They repaired what equipment they could, scavenged supplies, and waited. Arya sent out encrypted messages to surviving cells. Within a week, replies came back, fragmented, cautious but real. The rebellion wasn't dead. It was scattered, waiting for a spark. And Varen had become that spark. His survival, his defiance. It spread like wildfire. Whole battalions rallied under his name. The Revenant Ghost, they called him now. The weapon who turned against his masters. The Empire, humiliated by their failure to contain him, tightened its grip. Worlds were burned in retaliation, cities wiped from maps. Each atrocity drove more to the rebellion's side. Arya could feel momentum shifting. But so could the Empire. They sent their best now. Assassins, hunters, old revenants who hadn't defected. One by one they came for him. And one by one, they didn't return. It was on the eve of their greatest offensive that she realized what she feared most. Varen was no longer fighting for victory. He was fighting for something else, something personal. She found him in the old bunker, standing before a flickering hollow map. His armor hung from its rack beside him, stripped and repaired again and again. "The Imperial Command Center," he said, pointing to a red-marked world. "That's where it ends." She frowned. "That's suicide." "It's the core sector. No one gets near it." "I will." "You mean we," she corrected sharply. He shook his head. "You need to lead them." "If I go there, I don't come back." Her anger flared. "Then don't go. We've built something here people believe again. You think dying alone will save them?" He turned toward her then, his expression hard but not unkind. "If I kill the Emperor, it might." The words hit her like a blow. The Emperor, the one man whose orders had built Varen, whose command had destroyed entire worlds. It was madness. But in his eyes, she saw no hesitation, only certainty. That night, as the camp slept, Arya couldn't. She sat outside beneath the cold light of the moons, watching the dunes shimmer in the wind. She thought of every soldier who had died, every world lost, every face she couldn't forget. And she thought of him. The man she had once called a mercenary. The man who had walked through fire for her. She didn't know when admiration had become something more, only that the thought of losing him now felt unbearable. When dawn came, he was gone again. He left no message, no farewell, just his broken helmet on her table and a single line carved into its surface. "Don't follow me." She cursed him for a fool, then packed her gear, because of course she followed. By the time she reached the capital world, the Empire was already in chaos. Communications blacked out, power grids failing, entire defense networks shutting down. Varen had moved like a phantom through their ranks, dismantling them piece by piece. Arya slipped into the planet's undercity, following the trail of destruction until she reached the spire of the Imperial Citadel. There, amid the ruin of the central plaza, she saw him again, fighting his way toward the palace gates. Alone. The air burned around him, armor smoking, weapons red-hot. The defenders fell one by one, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. She screamed his name over the roar of battle, but he didn't turn. He moved forward, unstoppable, toward the place where the Empire had once made him a monster. And for the first time, Arya saw what destiny really looked like. Not prophecy, not glory, just a man walking into hell because he had nothing left to lose but the promise he made to himself. to stand against an empire, even if it killed him. And as the sky split open above the citadel, and the fire of a dying star rained down, Arya ran after him, into the heart of the empire itself. The storm above the capital raged with the fury of gods. The sky was a cauldron of fire and lightning as the empire's orbital cannons unleashed their wrath upon their own city, desperate to stop the man who had become a myth. Varen walked through the inferno as if born from it, his armor cracked, his movements relentless. Around him the citadel burned, the great spire of the Empire's power now a battlefield of ash and ruin. Arya followed in his wake, cutting through resistance with the remnants of her squad, each step a struggle against the collapsing world around them. She could see him ahead, that dark silhouette moving ever forward, and for a moment, he looked less like a soldier and more like a force of nature. Every corridor they passed through was lined with bodies. Imperial elites, revenant soldiers, mechanized sentinels, all fallen. The scent of scorched metal and blood was suffocating. Arya's breath came ragged through her mask, her muscles screaming with exhaustion. The comms were dead, her squad scattered, but she refused to stop. She would not let him die alone. She rounded a corner just as an explosion shook the hallway, the blast throwing her off balance. The world blurred, and through the haze, she saw Varen standing at the center of a storm of gunfire, his shield flickering, his weapon little more than molten scrap. He fought with his bare hands now, tearing through armor with precision born of rage and desperation. "Varen!" she shouted, firing to cover his flank. He glanced back once, just enough for her to see the flicker of relief in his eyes. "I told you not to follow me," he said through the din. "You think I ever listen?" she retorted, voice trembling with adrenaline and anger. Together, they pushed through the final gate, the massive blast doors shattering open under the pressure of his explosives. Beyond lay the Emperor's sanctum, a vast chamber of black glass and silver, silent except for the low hum of the Planetary Defense Corps pulsing beneath their feet. At the far end of the hall stood the Emperor. No guards, no entourage, just the man who had ruled countless systems with a word, his presence commanding even in stillness. His armor gleamed white, untouched by war, a cruel contrast to the ruin around him. "So," the Emperor said, his voice smooth and cold, "the prodigal weapon returns." He regarded Varen with detached amusement. "They said you were dead." Varen stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying across the chamber. "You should have made sure." The Emperor smiled thinly. "I made you. Every fiber, every nerve, every drop of blood that burns with that rage, I put it there. You are what you are because of me." His tone was almost paternal. "You could have been a god among mortals. Instead, you chose to be a ghost." Varen's gaze was steel. "You built a slave. You called it loyalty. But you forgot something." "And what's that?" the Emperor asked, raising a hand as energy crackled in the air. "Humans break chains," Varen said, and then he moved. The room erupted in violence. The Emperor's power flared, a torrent of lightning that tore through the floor and walls. Varen's shield flared to life, deflecting the first surge, but the impact threw him backward. Arya dove for cover, returning fire that dissipated harmlessly against the Emperor's energy field. The two titans clashed in the center of the hall, one forged by machinery and war, the other twisted by ambition and control. Every strike shook the foundations of the citadel. Varen's armor cracked under the force of a psychic blow, sparks raining down like molten rain. But he did not stop. He closed the distance, seized the Emperor by the throat, and slammed him into the ground hard enough to shatter the marble beneath them. "You took everything," Varen growled, pressing his blade against the Emperor's chest. "Every name, every world, every life that wouldn't kneel." The Emperor laughed even as blood trickled from his mouth. "And what will you do now? Kill me? You think the machine ends with me?" He thrust out his hand, and agony tore through Varen's body as the implants under his skin flared against his will. The Emperor's eyes burned white. "I can shut you down with a thought," he whispered. "You were never free." Arya screamed his name, firing a burst of plasma that shattered the control node behind the throne. The energy feedback lit the chamber in a blinding flash. Varen fell to one knee, smoke rising from his armor. The Emperor turned toward her, his face twisting in fury. "Insects!" he hissed. "All of you!" He raised his hand again, but this time Varen caught it mid-motion. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Not anymore." He drove his blade through the Emperor's chest, the energy of the planetary core surging through them both. The scream that followed was not human. It was the sound of an empire breaking. Light filled the hall, consuming everything. When the brilliance faded, the Emperor lay still, his eyes glassy, his throne cracked. Varen stood over him, barely upright, smoke pouring from his armor. The citadel trembled, alarms blaring. The planetary core had been destabilized. "You did it," Arya said, running to him. "You killed him." He looked at her, a faint smile ghosting across his face. "Then it's over." But she saw it in his eyes. It wasn't. The core was going critical. "We have to go," she said, grabbing his arm. He didn't move. "If I leave, this world burns," he said. "The chain reaction will take half the sector. Then we'll stop it together," she shouted, but he shook his head. "You get out, lead them, end what I started." He turned toward the console, his hands already moving across the controls. Arya felt her chest seize. "I'm not leaving you." He looked back at her then, and for a moment the warrior was gone. Only the man remained. "You have to," he said softly. "The galaxy needs someone who believes it can be saved. I'm just the reminder of what it costs." She wanted to fight him, to drag him away if she had to, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't resignation, it was peace. "Varen!" Her voice broke. He stepped close, lifting a hand to touch her cheek through the cracked glass of her helmet. "You made me remember who I was," he whispered. "That's enough." The floor shook violently. He pushed her toward the exit as flames erupted from the core below. "Go!" he shouted, and before she could reach him again, the blast doors sealed shut. Arya pounded against them, screaming his name as the citadel tore itself apart. The last thing she saw through the glass was his silhouette standing before the console, bathed in golden light. Then the world exploded. She woke to silence. Her armor was cracked, her body bruised, the ground cold beneath her. The citadel was gone. Only a crater remained, molten and vast. Above, the sky was clear for the first time in decades. The Empire's fleets hung motionless, leaderless. Her comm crackled with faint voices. Rebel transmissions, disbelief, hope. "The Emperor is dead," someone whispered. "The ghost killed him." Arya sat there numb, tears streaking through the dust on her face. In the weeks that followed, the rebellion swept across the stars. Systems once loyal to the Empire rose in defiance, inspired by the story of the man who had stood alone against tyranny. Statues fell, flags burned, and everywhere they spoke his name. Varen, the revenant who became legend. Arya led them, just as he asked, though her heart carried the weight of loss heavier than armor. One evening, months later, as the suns of a liberated world set behind the horizon, she stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. The wind carried the scent of salt and rain. In her hands, she held the broken piece of his helmet, the one he'd left her before his final mission. "You were wrong," she whispered. "You didn't die a ghost." She placed the fragment on the stone and turned away, her reflection shimmering in the waves below. Behind her, the sky shimmered faintly, like the echo of light long gone, and for just an instant, so fleeting she almost thought it a trick of the sun, she heard a voice, low and familiar. "Told you not to follow." She smiled through her tears, and the sea carried the sound of her laughter across the stars, where the story of a mercenary who stood against an empire would never be forgotten. The citadel's gates loomed like the jaws of a god, half melted, half standing, black smoke rolling out from within. Arya forced her way through the debris, her lungs burning from the ash. The ground shook with the force of detonations deeper inside, and through the gaps in the smoke she saw flashes of gold. Varen's shield, flickering like a dying star. She sprinted toward it, vaulting over the wreckage of broken mechs and shattered marble, her rifle clutched tight. The air was a storm of screams, gunfire, and the low, awful hum of dying engines. Somewhere above, The planetary shields cracked and fell, sending blue lightning raking across the sky. The Empire's capital, once the symbol of eternity, was collapsing in on itself, undone by one of its own creations. Inside the Grand Hall, the last of the Imperial Guard made their stand. They were no longer soldiers but fanatics, their armor adorned with the crest of the sun, their voices chanting the Emperor's name as if it might save them. Varen tore through them without slowing, his movements savage but weary. Every strike looked like it cost him, every step leaving blood where his boots met the polished stone. His shield had long since failed. Now only sheer will kept him moving. Arya burst into the chamber just as one of the guards lunged at his back. She fired without thinking, dropping the soldier instantly. Varen turned, surprise flickering across his face, quickly replaced by something softer, something almost like relief. "I told you not to follow," he said. "And I never listened," she shot back, reloading. "Let's finish this." They fought together as if they'd trained their whole lives for this moment. The hall became a maelstrom of light and blood. When the last guard fell, silence descended like dust. Ahead, the Emperor's throne room stood open, light pouring through the fractured ceiling, illuminating a single figure seated in shadow. The Emperor rose slowly, robes whispering like the sound of falling sand. His face was old, lined with the kind of calm that comes from centuries of rule. "Varen," he said, his voice both gentle and terrifying. "My greatest mistake." Varen limped forward, his breath ragged. "Your mistake," he rasped, "was thinking you owned what you built." The Emperor's smile was small and cold. "I gave you purpose, strength. You were nothing before me." Varen's jaw tightened. "I was human before you." The Emperor lifted a hand and energy flared between his fingers. "Humanity," he said almost tenderly, "was weakness, and weakness dies." Lightning tore from his palm, striking Varen square in the chest. He flew backward, armor cracking, smoke rising from the impact. Arya screamed, firing at the Emperor, but the bolts dissolved in mid-air against an invisible barrier. "Child," the Emperor said, turning to her, "you think love redeems him? It only makes him softer." She dropped her weapon, knowing bullets wouldn't touch him, and reached for the detonator on her belt. "Maybe," she said, voice shaking. "But softness is what your empire forgot." She triggered the charge. Explosions rippled through the walls as the palace foundations began to collapse. The Emperor turned in fury, his concentration faltering for the briefest instant, and that was all Varen needed. He rose from the floor, smoking, half-broken, eyes burning with something more than pain. He crossed the distance between them in a single, staggering step and drove his blade through the Emperor's chest. For a moment, neither moved. The light from the wound flared, flooding the room with impossible brilliance. The Emperor's eyes widened in disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. "You are me." Varen's voice was soft. "No," he said, "I'm what you could never be." The explosion consumed them both. When Arya woke, there was only silence. The throne room was gone. Half the citadel had collapsed into the canyon below. Dust fell from the ruins like slow rain. She crawled through the rubble, calling his name until her throat was raw. She found him near the shattered dais, buried beneath slabs of metal. His armor was in pieces, the blade still clutched in his hand. His eyes opened as she knelt beside him. "You came," he murmured, blood on his lips. "You knew I would," she whispered. "You did it, Varen. The Emperor's dead." He gave a faint smile. "Then maybe they'll remember what freedom costs." She grabbed his hand, shaking her head. "No, you'll see it. You'll live to see it." He looked at her then, truly looked, and in his eyes was peace. "I already did," he said softly. "In you?" His grip loosened, and his gaze drifted toward the collapsing sky. The light faded from his eyes before she could find the words she wanted to say. Arya sat there for a long time, surrounded by ruin, listening to the silence of a world reborn in fire. Above, the Empire's banners burned. Across the galaxy, transmissions crackled to life, news of the Emperor's death spreading faster than the flames that devoured his city. Worlds rose in rebellion, fleets switched allegiance, old enemies became allies overnight. The Empire fractured, its perfect machine grinding to a halt. And somewhere in the chaos, they began to whisper his name, Varen, the revenant ghost, the man who stood against an empire. Weeks passed. The citadel became a tomb, a monument to everything lost. Arya stayed long enough to make sure the people reclaimed it, not as a palace, but as a shrine to the fallen. Then she vanished into the stars. She carried his helmet with her, its surface scorched, the old inscription still visible. Every time she looked at it, she could hear his voice. Make it mean something. And she did. She took command of the new coalition's fleet, leading the final campaigns to free the outer systems. The war didn't end overnight, but the tide had turned. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy had hope. Years later, when peace finally came, she returned to the place where it all began, the ruins of that first city they'd fought to defend. The wind still carried the scent of ash, though grass had begun to grow between the cracks. She knelt there, laying the helmet on the ground. "You should have been here," she said softly. "You'd hate the speeches, the medals, the way they call you a hero." She smiled faintly. "But maybe you'd like the quiet. The people laugh again. The stars look brighter." She stood, brushing dust from her hands. "You changed everything, Varen. And maybe that's enough." As she turned to leave, a flicker of light caught her eye. On the horizon, where the sun met the dunes, a figure stood silhouetted against the glow. For a heartbeat she thought it was him. Broad-shouldered, motionless, the wind tugging at a tattered cloak. She blinked, and the figure was gone. Only the light remained, golden and endless. She smiled through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Rest easy," she whispered. "You kept your promise." She walked away without looking back. Behind her, the wind rose, carrying dust across the ruins like waves across an ancient sea. Somewhere in that shifting silence, the faint echo of footsteps followed, soft, steady, and fading toward the stars. And so the legend of the revenant ghost became more than a story. It became a vow, whispered by soldiers before battle, by colonists rebuilding shattered worlds, by children tracing constellations in the dark. They said his spirit still watched from beyond the edge of light, waiting for the day when humanity might forget what it means to stand alone against tyranny. And when that day comes, they believed, he will rise again, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that even in the heart of the void, one human soul can still defy the infinite. The galaxy moved on. Empires fell and rose again. Stars were born and died. But the scar he left on history never faded. Arya grew older, her hair streaked with silver, her hands marked by time and battle. Yet she never forgot the man who showed her that strength wasn't domination. It was defiance. When her own soldiers faltered, she would tell them the story not of a hero, but of a man who refused to kneel. And each time, she would end it the same way. "He thought himself a mercenary," she would say, her voice quiet but steady, "until he stood against an empire, and won us all the right to be human." Beyond the edge of known space, in the ruins of the citadel drifting through the void, a beacon still pulsed faintly beneath the rubble. An old signal, encrypted in a language long abandoned. Its message was simple, looping endlessly through the dark, between stars. For freedom. For the living. For the lost.